In my years in law enforcement, I would think that this is the one of the most terrifying type of investigations that I've seen.
He was placed in a dog kennel for hours on end without food. It's absolutely heartbreaking. These acts are senseless.
It's hard to sleep at night, just thinking about the abuses poor child went through.
This individual has a 20-year career in breaking the law. He's a career criminal. How many times in this state do we give individuals a second, third, and fourth, and fifth chance? Excuse me. I just, after 25 years of doing this, it's just frustrating.
If you behave like an animal, you'll live like an animal. Those were the words a 42-year-old monster whispered to a 13-year-old boy as he forced him into a dog cage, naked and shivering. What happened next was so horrific that seasoned homicide detectives couldn't sleep for weeks. When investigators finally opened that small plastic container sealed with duct tape, they found Jeremiah Valencia curled up like a broken doll, his jaw shattered so violently that bone jutted through his gums. But that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would shake New Mexico to its core. This is the story of how an entire system failed one innocent child, and how 3 people turned a home into a house of horrors where torture was entertainment and a boy's screams were silenced forever. Welcome back to Cold Crime Cases, where we dive deep into the stories that matter most. I'm your host, and before we begin this difficult but necessary journey, I need to ask something important. Some people scroll by true crime content. You didn't. That means you care about justice, about remembering the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. If you truly care about keeping these stories alive and ensuring they reach the people who need to hear them, hit that subscribe button. It's free, but it helps uncover the next hidden case before it happens again. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Whether you're in New York at midnight or London during your lunch break, your location and time help me understand when my audience is most engaged with these crucial stories. Because stories like Jeremiah's deserve to be heard around the world, at every hour. December 6, 2003. In the small community of Nam, New Mexico, a baby boy entered the world with the most incredible eyes anyone had ever seen. Jeremiah Andrew Valencia had a smile that could melt the coldest heart and a spirit that would shine bright despite the chaos surrounding him. A year later, he gained a little sister who would become his closest ally in an increasingly unstable world. Tracy and Pena and Andrew Valencia weren't model parents. Their lives were a revolving door of legal troubles, addiction, and crushing poverty. When the chaos became too much, Jeremiah and his sister found sanctuary with their grandmother, Teresa Tapia. In her warm home, Jeremiah could simply be what he was meant to be, a child. He could play, laugh, and most importantly, feel safe. His godmother, Celine Mera, also became a beacon of love in his young life. Even as a small child, Jeremiah possessed something rare and beautiful, the ability to see good in every person he met. He would spend countless hours playing with the family dogs, stopping to pet every stray cat he encountered, watching birds with pure wonder in his eyes. Animals sensed his gentle nature and were naturally drawn to him. But when Jeremiah turned 6, everything changed. Andrew Valencia was sent to prison, and his father would never see his son alive again. This moment marked the beginning of a tragic spiral that would ultimately cost Jeremiah his life. At school, Jeremiah blossomed into the person he was meant to be. Teachers remembered him as a boy who radiated genuine kindness and an eager hunger to learn. He wasn't shy at all. Instead, he approached life with an openness that was both beautiful and, as we'll see, ultimately dangerous. Jeremiah fell in love with Batman, learned to play the trumpet with dedication, discovered the music of rapper Logic, and cheered passionately for the Panthers. But 2 passions stood out above all others: his love for animals and his fascination with cars. He could identify makes and models from blocks away and dreamed constantly about the day he'd get his driver's license. But here's what made Jeremiah special: Even his dreams were about others. "When I get my license," he would tell his family with that radiant smile, "I'll drive all of you around." Even in his most personal fantasies, he thought about serving the people he loved. During these precious years, he grew especially close to his half-sister, Karen Gonzalez. She would take him fishing in Pecos, where Jeremiah would sit for hours with his fishing rod, completely at peace with nature. He loved cars, sports, building things, Karen would later remember, her voice breaking with the weight of those memories. By age 13, Jeremiah had become everything a parent could hope for in a teenager. He was full of plans for the future, deeply loved his family, believed in the inherent goodness of people, and maintained an trusting nature that would soon become his death sentence. The system fails. February 2017. Without explanation or warning, Tracy Pena made a decision that would seal her son's fate. She removed 13-year-old Jeremiah from school, telling officials she would enroll him in another institution in Santa Fe. She never did. This moment cannot be overstated in its importance. Schools often serve as the final line of defense for children being abused at home. Teachers notice changes in behavior, unexplained injuries, declining performance. But Jeremiah simply vanished from the education system, and incredibly, no one followed up. No one checked whether he had enrolled in his new school. No social worker knocked on the door. No administrator made a phone call. Under state law, parents are required to enroll children between the ages of 5 and 18 in school, but there was no mechanism to ensure compliance. Jeremiah had become invisible to the very system designed to protect him, and this invisibility became essentially a death sentence. Around June 2017, evil walked into the Valencia family's life wearing the face of Thomas Wayne Ferguson. This 42-year-old predator had a long, documented history of violence against women and children. He didn't choose victims randomly, he deliberately selected the most vulnerable, women struggling with addiction, those with criminal backgrounds, mothers desperate for male support who could be easily controlled. Tracy Pena fit his victim profile perfectly. A woman battling substance abuse, 22 arrests on her record, 2 children to care for, and a desperate need for stability that made her willing to overlook red flags that should have sent her running. Ferguson didn't come alone. He brought his 19-year-old son, Jordan Nunez, a young man who was himself a victim of his father's cruelty. Jordan had endured a childhood of extreme abuse at Ferguson's hands. Until age 18, he had been shuffled through 11 different foster families and psychiatric institutions. Now, desperate for his biological father's approval and completely unaware of the price that approval would demand, he had come home to a monster. Ferguson's true nature revealed itself immediately. He was rough and harsh with everyone in the household, didn't hesitate to strike Tracy or Jordan, and maintained a hostile relationship with neighbors. He quickly acquired aggressive dogs, ensuring that no one would feel comfortable approaching their property. Although Ferguson took an immediate dislike to Jeremiah, the boy connected instantly with Ferguson's dogs. Throughout his life, Jeremiah had possessed an almost magical ability with animals, and even in this dangerous situation, he spent hours playing with, feeding, and caring for these four-legged friends. It was perhaps the last innocent joy he would ever experience. The warning signs appeared within weeks. Ferguson began establishing what he called discipline in the house. Jeremiah could no longer freely go outside to play. He was forbidden from contacting certain friends. His world began shrinking at an alarming rate. Jeremiah's younger sister would later describe Ferguson to investigators. He was always angry and was always rude to everyone in the house. But anger was just the surface. Beneath Ferguson's rage lay something far more sinister, a sadistic pleasure in controlling and tormenting those weaker than himself. By August, Ferguson had begun actively isolating Jeremiah from anyone who might notice changes in the boy or question what was happening behind closed doors. Jeremiah was forbidden from calling his grandmother Teresa or his godmother Celine. When relatives attempted to visit, Ferguson always found reasons to turn them away. The punishments began for the slightest infractions. Ferguson constantly slapped and struck Jeremiah on the back of the head. He deprived the boy of food as punishment for disobedience. He locked Jeremiah in his room for increasingly long periods. And Tracy, under the influence of substances and paralyzed by fear of Ferguson, never intervened. The transformation in Jeremiah was heartbreaking to witness. The cheerful, outgoing boy who had made friends with a single word began to withdraw into himself. His easy smile disappeared. His natural openness was replaced by a haunted wariness. Fear settled into those incredible eyes that had once sparkled with joy and wonder. By fall 2017, Ferguson's abuse escalated from psychological torture to systematic physical brutality. He beat Jeremiah himself and encouraged Jordan to participate. Most sickeningly, he demanded that Jeremiah's own sister also take part in the punishments, creating a web of complicity that ensured everyone in the house became an accomplice to his crimes. Ferguson had created an entire system designed to break Jeremiah's spirit completely. A dog cage appeared in the house, and Ferguson's new routine became a daily nightmare. He would beat the boy mercilessly, force him to remove all his clothing, put him in an adult diaper to maximize his humiliation, and then lock him in the cage. With a sadistic smirk that haunted everyone who witnessed it, Ferguson would explain his twisted logic: if you behave like an animal, you'll live like an animal. But it was Ferguson who behaved like an animal, while Jeremiah remained purely human in his suffering. The psychological torture was as brutal as the physical abuse. Ferguson would urinate on Jeremiah while he was trapped in the cage, deriving sick pleasure from the boy's humiliation and the additional agony caused when the urine would burn his open wounds. Locked in that cage, Jeremiah would scratch at himself and cry from pain that no child should ever experience. The ultimate cruelty was that the dogs Ferguson had brought into the house, the same dogs that had once brought Jeremiah such joy, now received better treatment than he did. "If the dogs are starving, I'll starve," became Ferguson's favorite phrase, and he made good on that twisted promise. Jeremiah began losing weight at an alarming rate. His clothes hung on his increasingly thin frame like fabric draped over a skeleton. His sister and mother would secretly feed him scraps when Ferguson was absent, but it was never enough to stop his physical deterioration. By November, Ferguson had expanded his arsenal of educational tools. He no longer relied solely on his fists and feet. Now he used brass knuckles and boots reinforced with metal toes. Ferguson's favorite location for these lessons was Jeremiah's own bedroom, where he would position the boy in front of the fireplace and use him as target practice. After using illegal substances to fuel his rage, Ferguson would spend hours systematically beating Jeremiah while the boy was trapped against the fireplace. Day after day, the fireplace and the wall surrounding it became more and more stained with an innocent child's blood. The injuries accumulated relentlessly, and soon Jeremiah could only move with the aid of a walking cane. Even when Ferguson left the house, there was no relief for Jeremiah. During his absences, the boy was forced to remain in the cage wearing nothing but a diaper. When Jordan grew bored, he would release Jeremiah from the cage only to subject him to a different form of torture. He would put an electric shock collar designed for dogs around Jeremiah's leg, attach a leash, and walk him around the house. For entertainment, Jordan would send electric current through the collar, causing Jeremiah to jerk and scream in agony. Imagine if it was your child, your sister, or your friend trapped in that hell. Would you want their story buried under noise, or told with care so that others might recognize the warning signs? Subscribing to this channel helps ensure that no child's story fades away into forgotten darkness. Ferguson's creativity in devising new torments seemed limitless. Upon returning from one trip, He constructed a homemade spear from a screwdriver taped to a metal bar. This weapon introduced a new level of terror into what was already a house of horrors. Ferguson took sadistic pleasure in poking and stabbing Jeremiah with this makeshift spear. But his true evil lay in forcing everyone in the household to participate in the torture. He compelled Jeremiah's younger sister to stab her own brother with the spear. He made Jordan put the electric collar on Jeremiah's leg and press the button that sent searing pain through the boy's body. Even Tracy, under Ferguson's relentless pressure and threats, sometimes participated in tormenting her own son. Ferguson himself had developed a preference for a new instrument of torture, a sledgehammer. Under the influence of illegal substances that stripped away any remaining humanity, he would take this heavy tool and bring it down on Jeremiah's hands, targeting a boy who could no longer even properly defend himself. The house had literally transformed into a torture chamber. Not a single wall remained without splashes of Jeremiah's blood. Every room contained instruments specifically designed for his torment. The humiliations became increasingly sophisticated as Ferguson, intoxicated by substances and drunk on power, sought to completely destroy the innocent soul of a child. Sexual abuse became Ferguson's ultimate weapon for crushing Jeremiah's spirit entirely. The details of these assaults are too horrific to describe in full, but court documents reveal that Jeremiah was likely raped and burned before his tragic murder. By this time, Jeremiah could no longer walk, even with his cane. An old wheelchair appeared in the house, and now the boy could only sit in it and stare out the window at a world that had forgotten he existed. Jeremiah no longer expected rescue. He no longer believed in the possibility of escape. The only moments when life flickered in his eyes were when his sister would quietly approach and embrace him, her own heart breaking for her tortured brother. He was really skinny, his sister would later tell detectives, her voice barely a whisper. All his cuts were infected. He had a black eye and his teeth were knocked out. This was the condition of a 13-year-old boy who had once dreamed of getting his driver's license so he could drive everyone he loved around town. November 24, 2017. On this date, a tragic opportunity to save Jeremiah's life presented itself and was carelessly squandered. Thomas Ferguson was stopped by police in the parking lot of a Walmart in Santa Fe. This routine traffic stop should have been Jeremiah's salvation. Ferguson had an expired license. He had an active arrest warrant. He had violated the terms of his probation. By all accounts, he should have been arrested on the spot and removed from the home where he was slowly murdering a child. Instead, in a decision that haunts everyone involved, officers let Ferguson go without even issuing a ticket. They did arrest Tracy Pena on municipal warrants, but Ferguson walked free. These officers held Jeremiah's lifeline in their hands, and they let it slip away. If Ferguson had been arrested that night, Jeremiah Valencia might be alive today, 21 years old and driving his family around just as he had always dreamed. Thanksgiving Day, 2017. While families across America gathered around holiday tables to count their blessings, Jeremiah Valencia experienced the most horrific day of his young life. On this day that was supposed to celebrate gratitude and family bonds, Ferguson beat Jeremiah with such savage brutality that he finally shattered the boy's jaw in 2 places. Bone pierced through Jeremiah's gums, but Ferguson's rage was nowhere near satisfied. He grabbed the dying boy by the neck, lifted him off the ground, and pressed him against the wall. Then, in an act of unimaginable cruelty, he turned Jeremiah upside down and began slamming his head against the concrete floor. After this final beating, Ferguson shoved the barely breathing Jeremiah into the dog cage one last time. The boy was still alive, but his breathing was shallow and labored. His broken body could endure no more, but the torture wasn't over. Jordan Nunez, desperate for his father's approval even in this moment of ultimate horror, committed the act that finally ended Jeremiah's suffering. He began flipping the cage with Jeremiah inside over and over until the boy finally fell silent. Jeremiah's sister, understanding that something irreversible was happening, cried and tried to push Jordan away, but she was powerless to help her brother. Jeremiah Valencia died in agony and despair, trapped in a dog cage at the hands of the very people who should have protected him with their lives. He was only 13 years old. The next morning, with the cold calculation of practiced killers, Ferguson called his son. Together, Ferguson and Jordan carried Jeremiah's small body to the bathtub, where they washed the blood from his broken form. They then placed him in his bedroom, as if he were simply sleeping. This is the horrific scene that greeted Tracy when she returned home on November 26. Her son, the boy who had once smiled with such joy, lay lifeless in his own bedroom, a victim of torture so systematic and brutal that it defied comprehension. What followed Jeremiah's murder was a cover-up so callous that it revealed the complete absence of humanity in his killers. Ferguson forced Tracy and Jordan to wrap the boy's body in plastic like garbage, reducing a human being who had been full of dreams and love to nothing more than refuse to be disposed of. For 3 days, Jeremiah's body lay in the garage while his killers went about their daily routines. Then Ferguson forced Tracy to watch as he and Jordan dug a shallow grave near Route 503 and buried the boy who had once brought such light into the world. The most devastating aspect of this entire tragedy is that no one noticed Jeremiah's disappearance for 2 full months. The boy was dead and buried, but the world continued as if nothing had happened. School officials didn't question why a student hadn't returned after vacation. Social services didn't check on a child who had previously been under their supervision. Neighbors assumed he was living with his grandmother. Only Celine, his devoted godmother, continued searching. She called relatives, drove to every address she could think of, and contacted police repeatedly. Every turn was a dead end, she would later say, her voice heavy with the weight of unanswered questions and a love that refused to give up. The truth was finally revealed through the most unlikely of sources, prison gossip and a mother's inability to carry the weight of her terrible secret any longer. In January 2018, Tracy Pena found herself once again in Santa Fe County Jail, this time for violating her probation. Ferguson was also incarcerated by this point on unrelated charges. In her jail cell, Tracy could no longer bear the crushing burden of what had happened. The secret was eating her alive from the inside, and she finally confessed to a cellmate, "My son is dead. Thomas killed him." The words burst from her like poison finally being purged from an infected wound. The inmate who heard this confession couldn't remain silent. She understood that justice demanded action, and she passed this information to sheriff's investigators. On January 28, 2018, exactly 2 months after his death, investigators finally found Jeremiah's small body in that shallow grave near Nam. If Jeremiah had been alive, he would have been celebrating his 14th birthday in just 11 days. On January 29 through 30, 2018, Thomas Ferguson, Tracy Pena, and Jordan Nunez were arrested on charges of child abuse resulting in death. The sheriff who oversaw this investigation spoke to the media with a weariness that came from witnessing true evil. "I thought, what can I say to comfort the public and the folks out there that are following this case, and unfortunately I have absolutely nothing for you. I would like to say that the 3 individuals are behind bars, but that's not enough. In my years in law enforcement, I would think that this is one of the most terrifying type of investigations that I've seen. He was placed in a dog kennel for hours on end without food. It's absolutely heartbreaking. These acts are senseless. It's hard to sleep at night just thinking about the abuses this poor child went through." Thomas Ferguson never faced trial for his crimes. On April 27, 2018, he was found dead in his cell. Whether his death was suicide or something else, we will never know. What we do know is that he took the answers to many questions with him to the grave. Only Ferguson and Jeremiah knew the full extent of what happened in that house of horrors, and now only one of them can speak, and he speaks through the evidence left behind. In early August 2018, the shocking autopsy results were finally released. The Office of the Medical Investigator confirmed that 13-year-old Jeremiah Valencia died from blunt force trauma and had multiple new and old injuries consistent with the theory that he was beaten and tortured before his death. The autopsy report classified Jeremiah's death as a homicide and detailed injuries so extensive that reading them requires a strong stomach. Multiple jaw fractures, a displaced eyeball, tears in his scalp, cheek, and ear, broken hands and ribs, signs of sexual abuse, and portions of his body that had possibly been burned. The examination was limited by the advanced decomposition of his remains, meaning we may never know the full extent of his suffering. Forensic experts found traces of Jeremiah's blood in every single room of the house where he had lived his final months. They also found his DNA on the dog cage, the homemade spear, the sledgehammer, the electric collar, the brass knuckles, and Ferguson's boots. Each piece of evidence told a story of systematic torture that lasted for months. If stories like this make you want to protect the innocent and expose the truth, then don't just watch passively. Subscribe to this channel. That single click could be the reason another story like Jeremiah's finally gets heard by the people who have the power to make changes in our broken system. Tracy Pena accepted a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Nunez, receiving 12 years in prison. Many felt this sentence was far too lenient for a mother who had not only failed to protect her son but had actively participated in his torture. Jordan Nunez pleaded guilty in March 2020 and was sentenced to 21 years in prison in October 2021. At his sentencing, Nunez offered words that rang hollow to everyone who had followed this case. "I sincerely regret not calling 911. That was one of my biggest mistakes." Calling it a mistake minimized the calculated, deliberate nature of the torture that Jeremiah endured. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment, it was months of conscious participation in the systematic destruction of an innocent child. The story of Jeremiah Valencia isn't just a tale of individual evil, it's an indictment of multiple systems that failed at every level. The school system that allowed a child to disappear without follow-up. The social services that didn't check on a child who had previously been in their care. The law enforcement officers who let Ferguson walk free despite multiple violations. The neighbors who didn't ask questions when a friendly boy suddenly vanished from sight. The murder of Jeremiah Valencia exposed critical flaws in our child protection systems that continue to exist today. How many other children have disappeared from school rolls without follow-up? How many have been isolated from extended family members who might have intervened? How many warning signs have been ignored by adults who assumed someone else would take action? If you're still watching and haven't subscribed, I'm honestly curious about what's holding you back. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I actually want to know, because understanding my audience helps me tell these stories in ways that create real change. The story of Jeremiah Valencia is not just a chronicle of unthinkable evil, it's a mirror that reflects our collective responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us. This beautiful, trusting boy who dreamed of driving his family around died because too many people who should have acted chose to look the other way. This took me hours of painful research, reading autopsy reports, police files, and hearing the testimonies of family members whose cries for help were ignored for far too long. If you felt safe watching this from your screen, if this story moved you to anger or tears or determination, then the very least you can do is hit that red subscribe button and share this video. Every subscription, every share, every comment helps ensure that Jeremiah's story reaches more people who have the power to recognize warning signs, to ask difficult questions, to refuse to let another child become invisible. We owe it to Jeremiah, and to every child currently suffering in silence, to turn our horror into action. The system failed Jeremiah in life, but his death doesn't have to be in vain. Every time we see a child in trouble and intervene, every time we demand accountability from institutions, every time we refuse to turn away from uncomfortable truths, we honor the memory of Jeremiah Valencia and countless other children whose stories ended too soon. Subscribe to Cold Crime Cases. Share this video. Tell everyone you know about Jeremiah Valencia. Because a boy who believed in the goodness of people, who trusted when he should have run, who dreamed of serving others even in his darkest moments, deserves to be remembered not just as a victim, but as a light that refuses to be extinguished.